Good morning, Dan and Amy. And word out yesterday, Michael Flynn, General Flynn, not going to comply with a congressional subpoena, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Should we view that as
sign of guilt?
an admission of guilt? David French has a good piece on the topic. He happens to be a constitutional lawyer. He has a piece on the topic in National Review in which he says essentially Flynn is being judicious. He's got good attorneys, and he's listening to them. Flynn's attorneys suggesting that, look, there are members of the Senate Intelligence Committee that have made political statements about Flynn's guilt or innocence, that essentially they're not impartial. That's hardly in controversy. He's right, they're not. The other thing that French points out, federal investigations are perilous even for those targets innocent of the crimes being investigated. In fact, it's common for investigators to indict or convict the targets of their investigations for misconduct during the investigation rather than for the alleged crimes that sparked their inquiries to begin with. And he cites Martha Stewart being found guilty of lying to the FBI, not being found guilty of securities fraud, Scooter Libby being found guilty of lying to the FBI, not for leaking the name of Valerie Plame in those couple of examples. And those are salient examples.
You don't lie to the feds.
Particularly per our conversation with Jed Babin at the bottom of the hour, which he said there's some suggestion that Michael Flynn may have lied to the FBI during this inquiry. So they may not get him from the underlying issue which they were investigating, but for being untruthful during their inquiry. And so his lawyers are advising, and he is complying with the notion of not putting himself before or producing documents for the Senate Intelligence Committee. It's also an open question, by the way, whether the Senate Intelligence Committee will give way to the special counsel, Robert Mueller, or whether there will be concurrent inquiries, if you will. One, a special independent counsel investigation, and the other, this Senate Star Chamber.
Oh, really?
So that's an open question as well, and
yesterday
perhaps this is part of why Flynn's lawyers are advising as they are.
And yesterday, Paul Manafort's Stone, they both turned over Russian documents to the Senate Intel Committee. So that happened yesterday, and also James Comey allegedly gave memos that, after conversations he had with President Trump, he handed that over to the Senate Intel Committee as well, and he will be taking the stand after Memorial Day.
And Trump lets kind of a curious moment with President Trump in Israel yesterday, where he and Bibi were before the press corps, and Trump said this about his conversation with the Russians, a portion of which was leaked, at least a portion that occurred allegedly was leaked.
Just so you understand, I never mentioned the word or the name Israel. Never mentioned it during that conversation. They were all saying I did. So you had another story wrong. Never mentioned the word Israel.
So he's talking about never mentioning the word Israel as a source of intelligence that he allegedly disclosed to the Russians in their meeting. Mark Thiessen in the Washington Post, contemplating what the New York Times did, writing, ponder the irony. The geniuses at the New York Times so appalled by Trump sharing sensitive intelligence with the Russians that they shared even more sensitive intelligence with the media and thus the entire world in order to demonstrate that Trump cannot be trusted with sensitive intelligence. In so doing, these leakers possibly did far more damage to U.S. national security and intelligence sharing between the U.S. and Israel than anything Trump may have revealed to the Russians. All kind of under this umbrella of Russian collusion. But the problem or the challenge for the Democrats that want to see the Trump's presidency end prematurely is what specifically is the alleged crime and what is the evidence of said alleged crime. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Fox News contributor and famed Harvard Law constitutional law professor, Alan Dershowitz. Professor Dershowitz, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, but I'm not a Fox contributor. I just
you're not.
You're on Fox.
Okay.
And every other station. So
okay. All right.
I'm not a contributor.
Thank you for that correction. I'll stick with famed constitutional law professor. There we go.
I'll take that.
Okay. Very good. So yesterday, Michael Flynn takes the fifth. How should we interpret that in the context of the overall investigation running on a couple of fronts?
Well, first of all, it won't work for him to take the fifth because it's very easy to circumvent the taking of the fifth. All they have to do is give what's called production immunity. In other words, he has no Fifth Amendment privilege as to the documents themselves. They have to be produced. The only privilege he has is that he can't be identified as the one who produced them because that might be an indication of guilt. So all they have to do is give him what's called production immunity, and then they can compel him to turn over the documents. So this is only a delay. It's not going to result in the committee not getting the documents at all. Second, you don't infer anything. A good lawyer pleads the fifth for his client if there's anything in a chain of possible incrimination that could lead to drawing a negative inference. So we shouldn't draw very much from it.
Well, what about, do you think with this special counsel, are they going to find a crime that President Trump may have committed?
I don't think so. I can't see. I mean, I know the statutes fairly well. Even if there was coordination with the Russians during the campaign, which I've seen no evidence of, but even if there was, that would not be a crime. It might be something that's politically disadvantageous, but not a crime. Likewise, firing the FBI director is not a crime. So I don't think the special counsel is going to find any crimes. Look, I think as far as the leaking of the material to the Russians, the real villain are the two national security experts who disclosed to the Washington Post what happened in the Oval Office. They're the ones who told ISIS that there was a spy in their midst, and they're the ones who should be identified and prosecuted.
Well, right. And so with Mueller as the special counsel and given wide berth to pursue the investigation how he sees fit, this could turn potentially back to the leakers, or at least include the leakers, crimes we know that were committed, right?
I would hope so. People who leak classified information are felons. They break the law, and they should be prosecuted. So the Washington Post has a constitutional right to publish the material, but the leakers have no right whatsoever to turn the material over to the Washington Post. I think the Washington Post should have exercised some judgment and might not have, in the exercise of judgment, published this material. Look, I think President Trump made a mistake, too, if he disclosed, in fact, to the Russians, the name of the city where the intelligence emanated. But I do think that the real villains are the national security people who disclosed to the Washington Post the classified material.
And what about another portion of this entire discussion that has been put kind of on the back burner, and that's the allegations of previous Obama administration officials, most notably Susan Rice, using the power of the surveillance state to surveil political opponents?
I have heard no information, no evidence that would support that contention, and I'd like to see the evidence before I comment on it. But I've heard nothing that would support that contention. I don't believe it.
Well, okay, but I mean, isn't that your position as to Russian collusion? And we're still pursuing a Senate Intelligence Committee investigation as well as an independent counsel inquiry.
Everything should be investigated.
Right.
But I don't think accusations should be made without a basis, and I see no basis for making that kind of accusation against Susan Rice.
Well, there was something else that was leaked to the media, apparently a meeting between President Trump and FBI Director Comey back in February 14th, where he asked Comey to end the FBI Flynn probe. I mean, if that really did happen, don't you think Comey would come forward and say, hey, there's, intimidating of the witness, obstruction of justice?
I suspect it did happen, and I don't think that Comey regarded it as an obstruction of justice.
So you think it did happen, that conversation took place?
I think it did happen in some form or another. Comey takes very careful notes, but I don't see that constituting an obstruction of justice. I've made that request on behalf of clients over and over again. He's a good guy, lay off him. So I don't think it's an obstruction of justice. Unfortunately, I have to catch a train, so I have to leave now. But
Oh.
it's been nice talking.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Professor Dershowitz. Appreciate your time. Thank you. Yeah. Well, and the Comey thing, just picking up on that. I mean,
Okay.
again, Comey and McCabe both
Mhm.
saying the investigation had been interfered with. The FBI investigation of Russia collusion had not been interfered with by Trump administration officials. This month, they said that.
Okay.
So the nature of the conversation that Comey had with Trump, to Dershowitz's point, using just basic logical inference, Comey didn't think it was him trying to influence or obstruct because he said so. Now he's going to come back and testify before the Senate that after consideration and termination, he's rethought that conversation. I mean, come on, it doesn't pass the smell test. The other thing, though, is just, and I wish we would have got to it with Dershowitz, is just, he opposed the special counsel, did Dershowitz, thought it was unnecessary. We played part of his interview with Tucker Carlson yesterday, where he talked about what's going on here is reputation management by all parties. This is all politics, and that's what I believe it is. This is all politics in terms of Democrats grinding their axe to score political points against Trump with the midterms ahead, and the functionaries in the federal government who have bright legal careers managing their reputation, sidling up to the president when necessary, because that generates great influence and is very marketable when you get out of Department of Justice, and distancing themselves when it's something unpopular that could negatively impact their professional standing. That's essentially what Dershowitz was saying. I agree with that. That's what I think is happening. And at some point, here's the thing with Democrats, for the Democrats, and even the McCain Republicans, what, again, is the alleged crime, and what, again, is the alleged evidence to support any allegations of criminal wrongdoing outside of Mike Flynn? Even if Mike Flynn goes down, say, for lying to the FBI, even if he goes down, that's not a good day. That's a scandal within the administration. But that is not the same thing as saying Trump is guilty of any even political misconduct, much less criminal misconduct. Very different things.